In this very in-depth forecast, the Central Plains are being monitored for an upper echelon tornado outbreak as a rare high risk has been issued. Anywhere from discrete to linear storms is expected to bring multiple strong to potentially violent long-track tornadoes, widespread extreme hail greater than 2 inches, and widespread and destructive wind gusts greater than 80 miles per hour. Everything you need to know on Project Gladiator. Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for May 6th of 2024. For today, we do have a high risk for the Central Plains for southern Kansas into central Oklahoma, with a moderate risk that extends from southern Kansas into the majority of Oklahoma, excluding a good portion of southeastern Oklahoma and the Oklahoma Panhandle. But we do have an enhanced risk that extends all the way up into southern Nebraska, into western Missouri and northwestern Arkansas, with a slight risk extending all the way up into South Dakota there, and across southern and western Iowa, western Illinois, Missouri, northwestern Arkansas, into northern Texas and the Texas Panhandle. Risks for today do include a 30% tornado risk for the high-risk region. That's going to be the primary driver for that high-risk region there, with a 10% and a 15% that extend all the way up into southern Nebraska. We are expected to see the possibility of multiple long-track tornadoes. In fact, we are not really expected to see the possibility. The possibility is right here. We are expected to see multiple long-track and potentially violent and extremely dangerous tornadoes across this region. If you live in the affected region, please make sure you are staying weather alert and taking the necessary precautions and watching for any updates on the weather. If you live in this affected region, as storms will be quite dangerous. For our wind risk, we do have a 30% for the enhanced risk region, with a hatched area indicating the possibility of some widespread and destructive damaging wind gusts, with the potential for some more linear storms further off to the north and east. And for our hail risk, we do have a 45% for southern Kansas and Oklahoma for the high risk and the moderate risk locations, where we could see the potential for massive hailstones and extreme hail across this region. And the possibility for massive hail extends all the way up into southern Nebraska. Taking a look at our WPC outlook, starting off with the excessive rainfall forecast. For today, we do have a dual slight risk. One for southwestern Iowa into eastern Nebraska, eastern Kansas, and northeastern Oklahoma, and western Missouri, with another slight risk for eastern Montana into northeastern Wyoming, as well as a marginal risk for portions of the eastern seaboard for Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, southern Indiana, southern Ohio. In the slight risk regions, we could see the potential for some scattered flash flooding, while in the marginal threat areas, we could see the potential for some more isolated flash flooding. Taking a look at our winter weather outlooks for today, we are expected to see the possibility of some pretty widespread heavy snowfall across elevated portions of the Rockies. For elevated portions of the Rockies in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and northern Nevada, as well as maybe even into a small portion of extreme western South Dakota there. And that's about it as far as winter weather. Taking a look at our weather models, starting off with our 500 millibars and our surface observations and how those are going to work in conjunction with our risk for severe thunderstorms for today. As far as our surface observation goes, we are still hours out from storm development, so our surface observations are behind. But what is expected to happen is we are expected to see this low pressure system likely move in closer to around the Nebraska region, and that's going to have a dry line that's going to be draped down across the Central Plains. That's going to trigger our severe thunderstorms along that dry line. And we're going to have the warm front that is going to push off to the north into South Dakota, Iowa, or southern Minnesota, into either northern Illinois or southern Wisconsin. And anywhere in this warm sector could see the potential of some pretty significant severe thunderstorms, especially further south along the dry line into Oklahoma and Kansas. We also have a extremely powerful 500 millibar trough here, a really, really powerful trough, really powerful, really textbook as well. We have a clear negative tilt pushing into this region, and if I turn on my isobars here for 500 millibars, so we can see how those are kind of spreading apart, and how they are going to be oriented to that dry line. We are expected to see some pretty perpendicular, somewhat perpendicular isobars and wind vectors to the dry line here. That will support potentially some more semi-discrete mode and potentially some discrete mode. Any discrete storms that can maintain being discrete will have the best chance at producing a tornado. However, we will probably have a little bit more of a messy to more messy linear mode, or more linear mode across this region due to just more widespread storm coverage. But further off to the north, we will have much more parallel storm vectors to our initial boundary, so that will support more of a linear mode off to the north into Kansas there, and support overall more of a damaging wind risk, but still could see the potential of multiple embedded tornadoes. But the tornado risk will definitely be the primary thing with that, but we will also need to see the potential for damaging wind gusts. You'll definitely need to watch out for the potential for some strong damaging wind gusts with more linear storms further off to the north. But this is, again, a very, very clear negative tilt. The majority of our low pressure system is off to the north, but we also do have a embedded shortwave here. I drew that low pressure system horribly, but we have a embedded shortwave further down to the south, and we have really, really powerful and really broad and very strong 500 millibar flow. With 500 millibar flow, that is expected to get upwards of potentially 70 to potentially even 80 miles per hour across this region, and that will be extremely supportive of severe thunderstorms, and definitely significant severe thunderstorms across this region with that dry line that's going to trigger them. Again, this is a really, really powerful trough, and this will definitely support a lot of speed shear across this region and the potential for some massive hailstones as well. Taking a look at our low-level jet and our 850 millibar winds and how that will affect our directional shear and our risk for tornadoes across this region. We are expected to see a extremely powerful low-level jet across this region, with it initially being around 40 to potentially 50 miles per hour across this region, at least the upper 40 miles per hour across this region when storms initially develop. Further off to the west into more western, northwestern Oklahoma, not necessarily in the panhandle. And as they progress through the region, the low-level jet will likely increase to more widespread and potentially even the upper 50 miles per hour across this region, and continue to increase to even potentially reach the mid to even the upper 60 miles per hour in some regions. The widespread low 60 miles per hour is definitely a possibility with this low-level jet, and will support very, very strong, very widespread, very large amounts of storm relativity values across this region, very large amounts of directional shear, and will be very, very supportive of the potential for multiple strong and long track tornadoes across this region. I do think that they may have to shift the high risk potentially a little bit off to the east here, where the low-level jet will be strongest, but instability will still be really strong to also support the potential for for multiple strong to long track tornadoes across this region. We may need to shift it a little bit off to the east. However, we won't really have too much of a discrete mode as storms continue eastward. So it may shift eastward just a tiny bit, may not shift at all, because we are also needing to watch for where there is going to be more discrete storms. But that really strong low-level jet will continue up across the rest of the 15% tornado risk as well, and the rest of the 10% tornado risk, with a low-level jet across Kansas that is expected to get upwards of the 40 to 50 miles per hour as well, and that will also support some really strong directional shear to support the potential for strong tornadoes as well. Taking a look at our 200 millibar winds and how that will affect our speed shear and our overall risk for severe thunderstorms with the spreading of our wind vectors. We are expected to see a really powerful 200 millibar jet here that is expected to feed into this region directly, with a really powerful 200 millibar jet that is expected to reach upwards of 100 knots, potentially reaching above 110 knots, 115 knots across this region, and feed directly into the high risk region. And you can see that we have some really prominent spreading of our wind vectors here. Very large amounts of defluence and very large amounts of lift will be a major aid for our risk for severe thunderstorms as a result. And with the strong 200 millibar jet that's going to be moving into this region, we are expected to see very large amounts of speed shear and the potential for massive hailstones and very well sheared storms. Taking a look at our storm relative velocity and our directional shear and how that will affect the risk for tornadoes across this region. As storms track through the central portion of the high risk region, we are expected to see storm relative velocity values range anywhere from 300 to potentially 400 and even 500 meters squared a second squared of storm relative velocity, and that will continue to increase to even the 600s and potentially even the 700 meters squared a second squared of storm relative velocity across this region. We are expected to see very strong directional shear across this region, and that'll be very supportive of the potential for strong and long track tornadoes. Again, strong and long track tornadoes, multiple of them are expected for today, and that risk for strong tornadoes will continue up into Kansas with some really strong storm relative velocity values upwards of 300 as well, extending up across eastern Kansas, which will also be supportive of the potential for a couple of strong tornadoes. Taking a look at our bulk shear and how that will affect our risk for hail across this region, we are expected to see very large amounts of bulk shear across this region, with bulk shear values that are expected to get upwards of 50 knots ahead of our storms. While backing our storms, we aren't really expected to have as strong shear as we are expecting, but we will have a small pocket of bulk shear values upwards of 90 knots, kind of far from our storms, not necessarily backing them too closely. Overall, we do have some really strong bulk shear values ahead of our storms and even backing our storms to a certain extent. I don't necessarily think that these are up to par with a moderate risk for large hail. However, it is mainly for coverage instead of intensity. But regardless, this will definitely be supportive of the potential for massive hailstones across this region. Regardless, we could still see hailstones probably reach upwards of 3 to potentially even 4 inches. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity so we can go over some timing and some general radar analysis. Starting off with our radar analysis, there are two main things that I want to watch for today. Is the fact that we may get multiple renegade supercells ahead of the leading edge of ahead of the leading edge of our storms. The main event is likely going to be these more robust storms that you see further off to the west, but I am very curious about these Renegade supercells. This is going to be before our low-level jet fully strengthens, but where we do have some really strong instability. I don't know if our cloud cover will fully be out of this region by the time that these develop, but Renegade supercells were the reason that they did the majority of the work on the April 27th, 2024 outbreak that we had not too long ago. Those Renegade supercells did the majority of the work for that outbreak. However, for the majority of our more robust storms, you can tell that it is expected to be extremely messy with the majority of these storms. But still, regardless, this is an extremely highly conducive environment. So even if it is still messy, we could still see, and we most likely will see, multiple strong tornadoes come out of this, even if it is going to be a little bit more on the messy side. The more discrete storms, which will likely develop before becoming more messy, will have the best chance at producing tornadoes. Anything that can remain more discrete will have the best chance at producing tornadoes, but still, more messy storms will be the main event for today and still be the primary concern, and will be capable of all hazards. As far as the timing, we are expected to see those Renegade supercells likely develop around 3 to 4 p.m. Just to the west of the Oklahoma metro region, and just to the west of central Oklahoma. Move into the central Oklahoma region around 5 to 4 p.m. and quickly die off, with some more robust storms continuing into the Wichita region ahead of our storms around 6 to 7 p.m. With our more robust storms beginning to develop around 4 to 5 p.m. With more discrete development further down to the south to start off our high risk for our 6 to 7 p.m. Moving into the majority of the high risk region as more discrete storms around 7 to 8 p.m. And continuing through anywhere from 9 to 10 p.m. to potentially midnight to 1 a.m. So this is going to be more of a nocturnal event. But we will still have plenty of daylight for those first couple of hours. And even when we lose that daylight, storms will still be capable of extreme hazards. And further off to the north as well, you can still see that more linear mode. It is going to be more messy and could potentially initially start as some more discrete development. That's definitely possible around 2 to 3 p.m. and move into central Kansas around 6 to 7 p.m., moving into the Wichita region, likely around 8 to 7 p.m., and move into the Topeka region around 10 p.m. to 9 p.m., and the Kansas City region around 10 to 11 p.m., and moving out of the enhanced risk region, likely around 2 to 3 a.m., with storms still lingering back into the moderate risk and the enhanced risk region further down to the south around the 2 to 3 a.m. time frame. So our timing's kind of going to be all over the place, but you can see how well defined this leading edge of our storms is on our composite reflectivity. Look at how well defined that is. That is a really, really nasty look for a very, very strong damaging wind gusts, and we will definitely see the possibility for destructive winds come out of that. Taking a look at our dew points and how that will affect our instability across this region, we are expected to see a very large amount of moisture across this region, with dew points that are expected to get upwards of the low 70s across the high risk region, which will support very, very large amounts of instability across this region. That's the bottom line. And with constant moisture advection, replenishing anything that is lost, and constant instability feeding into this region, again, we will have very, very large amounts of instability. Taking a look at our temperatures, we are expected to see some pretty warm temperatures, with temperatures that are expected to get upwards of the mid to low 80s across this region, and the upper 70s across this region, which will support very large amounts of instability amongst our extreme dew point values. Anyone in this region should be able to feel the power in the environment and how just juicy it is for storm development right now, especially with how hot and humid it probably is, and how hot and humid it's going to be in the future as the sun continues to shine on this region. Again, we are expected to see very, very large amounts of instability across this region as a result of very large amounts of heat. Again, this will be more of a nocturnal event to some extent, but we will likely see temperatures probably drop to the more mid and upper 70s across this region, more of the 70s, which will support less instability, but we will still see very large amounts of instability with our very, very large dew point values. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that will affect our instability across this region, we are expected to see some pretty decent lapse rate values across this region, with lapse rates that are going to be pretty strong ahead of our storms, with lapse rates that are expected to get upwards of the upper 8s, the upper 7s, the mid 7s, maybe even a low 8 across this region, and likely increase as the sun begins to set and we have temperatures change around a little bit. We will likely see an increase in lapse rates, with lapse rates probably reaching upwards of the low 8s across a more widespread region, and that will likely continue up across eastern Kansas. And these strong lapse rates will continue to stay ahead of our storms and continuously support very large amounts of instability. And this will be a massive aid for our instability and overall potential for severe thunderstorms, as well as be a massive aid for our hail risk as well, as stronger lapse rates will lead to a larger cold sector aloft and allow for hail development for longer. Taking a look at our cloud cover and how that will affect our instability and the potential for severe thunderstorms across this region. For the majority of the day, we are expected to see some pretty hefty cloud cover across this region, which will likely prevent any overmixing for the majority of the day, and then we'll likely get a clearing that is expected to develop, and that will allow for surface heating before storms develop, and that is going to be probably the straw that broke the camel's back, as if we had extended cloud cover, then we will likely not see as high of a risk for severe thunderstorms today, and that would be a much, much larger uncertainty. But with the fact that we are expected to see extended cloud cover for the majority of the day until right before storms develop and we see a clearing that's going to develop, that's going to allow for surface heating and prevent any over mixing whatsoever, and be very, very good to our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, and support very large amounts of instability across this region and increase lapse rates with that clearing there. Taking a look at our 700 millibar temperature and how that's going to affect our convective inhibition and our overall risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, it does look like we are expected to see a very, very strong warm air advection in our warm sector, and that will likely lead to a strong to moderate elevated mixed layer all across the warm sector here. Maybe not all the way up into Nebraska, likely be more moderate, but we'll still see an elevated mixed layer there, and that will likely prevent any additional convection from forming until the main event can really form, with the exception of some of those renegade supercells that may fire in the high risk region initially. But by the time the sun does set, we won't see convective inhibition increase again because instability will already be way too strong to really put a cap on it already when it's already going. We'll have to wait for instability to die out before we can see this environment capped again. So it will be a very long while until this environment is capped. So even through the overnight hours, this isn't expected to be capped again, and storms will have no problem with convective inhibition, it seems. But that elevated mixed layer will likely lead to much more explosive storm development and the possibility for some much stronger instability values across this region. Taking a look at our most unstable cape and how that's going to fuel our overall risk for severe thunderstorms for today, we are expected to see extreme amounts of instability across this region, with cape values that are expected to get upwards of the upper 3,000s and even the low 4,000s across this region, maybe even approaching the mid to upper 4,000s across southern Oklahoma here. Very large amounts of instability will be very supportive of the potential of multiple strong to long track tornadoes, especially amongst really powerful storm relative helicity values across this region. Again, this is an upper echelon threat, and there is a reason why the SPC did issue a high risk. This is no joke. Everything has we're basically just checking off all the boxes by this point for a tornado outbreak. We have extreme amounts of instability across this region, and that will be more than sufficient to fuel the potential of multiple long track and strong tornadoes and the possibility of violent tornadoes as well. Taking a look at our most unstable cape and how that will fuel the potential for surface-based storms, I don't really have too much to say about this other than the fact that the majority of our most unstable cape translates down to our surface-based cape, indicating that we will see the surface-based storms. We won't see the potential, but we will see surface-based storms across this region. Storms will be surface-based guaranteed and will be able to support the potential for surface-based rotation, surface-based inflow, and the potential for tornadoes across this region. We should not see any elevated development, as we will have strong surface-based instability. It does look like the majority translates down to our surface-based. We don't have everything entirely translating down in our surface-based cape. It is slightly weaker than our most unstable cape, but we still have some extreme cape values at our surface-based cape, with cape values that are still getting into the upper 3,000s and the low 4,000s, and even the mid 4,000s in some regions. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability across this region, how that will aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, we will have some moderately strong 0 to 3 kilometer instability across the high risk region, which will be a massive aid in fueling our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region and fueling our severe thunderstorms. 0 to 3 kilometer instability being moderately strong. With the amount of storm relative helicity we have, we will likely have at least some pretty strong surface vorticity as well, so we will potentially see a hotspot for our cheat code to develop across this region, and that will be a massive aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms overall. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that will indicate the potential for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see basically off the chart energy helicity index values here. They literally go off the charts here. They completely max out. You see that hole here? This hole? That's off the charts energy helicity index values. If you remember back to when we did coverage for, I think, Hurricane Idalia, when we had so much excessive rainfall that our total rainfall models went off the charts, and it just didn't indicate anything where it went off the charts. It was just a hole. That's what's happening here. But for energy helicity index values, these are insanely high energy helicity index values, higher than anything I have ever seen before on this channel, and hopefully the only time we see anything this high. This is extremely dangerous energy helicity index values, upwards of 15 to 14 in the teens, the widespread teens across this region. extremely dangerous and very, very supportive of the potential for very, very strong tornadoes being possible, very large amounts of tornadoes being possible, and the potential for violent tornadoes as well. We will definitely see a huge overlap of our ingredients for tornadoes across this region. That's what Energy Helicity Index is, a raw combination of instability and directional shear. We will see an extreme amount of Energy Helicity Index values, very large amounts of instability, very large amounts of storm relative helicity. Again, a tornado outbreak is expected today. Taking a look at our significant tornado parameter and how that will indicate the potential for strong tornadoes across this region, we also have some really, really strong significant tornado parameter values to go with our strong Energy Helicity Index values. With significant tornado parameter values that are expected to get anywhere from the 5s to potentially even the 8s, and maybe even approaching the 9s and the 10s in some regions. Very, very high significant tornado parameter values that go all the way up into the weird pinkish color and the very deep, very bright and deep flashy electric blue. This is very, very, very indicative of the possibility of strong tornadoes across this region. Again, we are more than likely expected to see the possibility for multiple strong tornadoes across this region, and a tornado outbreak is expected. Taking a look at our damaging wind gusts, something I do want to mention is that while we were going over the models for other things, in the midst of doing that, they did add a 45% risk for damaging wind gusts. So now we have a moderate risk for damaging wind gusts as well for southeastern Kansas and northeastern Oklahoma, where we are expected to see much more widespread and very strong damaging wind gusts as well. Again, I do think a derecho is possible. We will definitely see, again, very, very strong damaging wind gusts across this region. It's definitely not going to be the primary risk, but with a more linear mode across this region, it's definitely very possible. And we could definitely see damaging wind gusts upwards of 80 to potentially 90 miles per hour across this region. So even if you guys aren't in the main tornado risk, which you still need to be staying weather alert for the majority of the thing, you also need to be paying attention to the risk for hail and damaging wind gusts, as those will also be potentially life-threatening. I have officially ran out of time, so now it is time for me to go to the doctor and hopefully get some medicine to clear this all up. So now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please, for the love of everything, stay weather alert. This is the highest risk for severe thunderstorms I have ever seen. And hopefully, I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.